The fluorescent light above my desk had been flickering for 3 weeks. I'd put in the maintenance request twice. Nobody came. That morning, sitting under that stuttering light with a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even remembered it was there, I thought, not for the first time, that this place had a way of wearing you down so slowly you almost didn't notice. Almost. My name is Patrick. I'm 51 years old. I've spent the last 11 years of my life working for Meridian Logistics Solutions, a mid-sized freight coordination company out of Mississauga, Ontario. We handled contracts for manufacturers across the GTA, managed dispatch networks that stretched from Windsor to Thunder Bay, and I built the operations division from a team of 4 people sharing one printer to a department of 22 that ran like a machine I was proud of. 11 years. I want you to understand what that means before I tell you what happened. When I started at Meridian, my daughter Zoe was 7 years old. She used to draw pictures of Daddy's office in crayon, a big rectangle with lots of little rectangles inside, all of them with smiley faces. She's 18 now. She got accepted to Dalhousie in the fall. Environmental science. She wants to work in marine conservation. I cried in the car on the way home from the open house. Didn't tell her that. My wife Lynn, she kept the house running through the years when I was putting in 60, 65 hours a week. She's a dental hygienist, practical, grounded. She used to say, "Patrick, they're lucky to have you." I used to believe her. I should have listened to her more carefully when she started saying it in the past tense. I started at Meridian as a senior coordinator. Within 3 years, I was managing regional operations. Within 5, I had taken on the Western Ontario freight contracts, contracts that represented 40% of the company's annual revenue. My boss, the man who hired me, was a guy named Robertson. Fair man. Old school. He retired in 2021, and that's when everything started to shift. The new VP of operations came in from outside. I wasn't considered for the role, which stung, but I understood. They wanted fresh direction. The board wanted someone with national experience. Fine. I made my peace with it. I kept my head down and I kept delivering. What I didn't account for was who she'd bring with her. His name was Trent, her son-in-law. And I want to be very careful here because I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions. I don't traffic in bitterness. But what I watched unfold over the following 18 months was not something I could have invented if I tried. Trent joined the company as a strategic operations consultant, a title that, as far as I could tell, had never existed at Meridian before and has not existed since. He was 31. He had a business degree from a school I won't name, 3 years of experience in something adjacent to supply chain, and a handshake that lasted too long. I was asked to onboard him. I want to sit with that for a second, because I think it says everything. The man who had spent over a decade building the division was asked to train the person who, though nobody said it out loud, was being positioned to eventually run it. I smiled. I showed him the dispatch systems. I walked him through the client relationship history. I explained why certain contracts had particular sensitivities, which account managers responded well to which communication styles, where the leverage points were in our supplier negotiations. I gave him everything I knew, because that's what professionals do. He took notes. He nodded. He said, absolutely a lot. 3 months in, he was sitting in on executive briefings I wasn't invited to. 4 months in, he was CC'd on emails from our largest client, CP Rail, that had previously come directly to me. 5 months in, my VP called me into her office and told me with a smile I have thought about many times since that Trent was going to be taking on expanded leadership responsibilities going forward and that she wanted me to support his growth. I asked what that meant for my role. She said my role was evolving. That is corporate language for, we are moving you aside. I drove home that evening on the 401 with the radio off. Lynn had made chicken stir-fry, Zoe's favorite, because she was visiting for the weekend from Kingston, where she'd been doing a gap year co-op. We ate together at the kitchen table, the 3 of us. Lynn was telling a story about a patient who'd come in wearing hockey equipment. Long story, genuinely funny, and I laughed at the right times and passed the rice when asked, and I don't think either of them noticed that I wasn't fully there. After dinner, Zoe went to call a friend. Lynn and I sat on the back deck with tea. She looked at me and said, "What happened?" I told her. "All of it." The whole slow slide of the past months, the briefings I wasn't invited to, the emails, the meeting that afternoon. She listened without interrupting, which is something I love about her. When I finished, she set her mug down on the armrest of her chair and said, "So what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I couldn't afford not to have a plan. Zoe's first year at Dow was going to cost us somewhere around $32,000 when you accounted for tuition, residence, the meal plan. We had savings. We'd been disciplined about the RRSPs. The TFSA was in decent shape, but the timing was terrible. Losing my salary, or even taking a step down in title and compensation, would have real consequences. The mortgage on our house in Oakville doesn't care whether I'm feeling professionally disrespected. So I stayed. And I watched. Over the next 2 months, I watched Trent get things wrong. Not catastrophically, not in ways that were immediately visible to the executive team, but in ways that I could see. He restructured the routing priorities for our Hamilton accounts without consulting the account managers, and we lost 3 weeks of goodwill with a client we'd spent 2 years bringing back after a dispute in 2019. He approved a supplier rate without running it through our standard comparison model, and we paid 8% over market for 6 weeks before someone flagged it. I documented everything, quietly, in a personal file on my laptop at home, not on company servers. Not because I was planning to do anything with it, just because, and Lynn will tell you this is very much who I am. I needed to understand what I was seeing. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. The confirmation came on a Tuesday in February. I got an email, standard enough format, HR letterhead, our director's name at the bottom. It informed me that effective March 15th, my position as Director of Operations, Western Ontario, would be eliminated as part of a structural realignment. I was being offered a role as Senior Advisor, Operations, which carried a 15% reduction in salary, no direct reports, and responsibilities that amounted to answering questions from the person who was taking my job. The person taking my job was Trent. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and sat in my chair for a few minutes. I've worked since I was 16 years old. Grocery store, then a warehouse in Brampton, then community college, then a series of increasingly responsible positions over 25 years of building something. I am not a person who rattles easily. I grew up watching my father work double shifts at a paper mill in Sault Ste. Marie, and he taught me that work is dignity, and that dignity is not negotiable. I wasn't angry. I want to be honest about that, because anger is what people expect in a story like this, and it's not quite what I felt. It was something colder than anger. Something more like clarity. I called Lynn from the kitchen. She came in from the living room where she'd been reading. I showed her the email. She read it once, put the phone down on the table between us, and said, "You're not taking that." "No," I said. "I'm not." That night, I called my brother-in-law, Derek. He's a labor lawyer in Hamilton, been practicing for 20 years. We had dinner at his place in Dundas a week later. His wife made pierogies. There was a lot of good wine, and I laid out the whole timeline for him. The onboarding of Trent, the progressive exclusion from meetings and communications, the restructuring email, all of it. Derek listened the way lawyers listen, which is differently from how regular people listen. He asked a few questions. He asked if I had documentation. I said yes. He asked if I had kept copies of my performance reviews. I said yes. Every single one. Going back to 2013, all of them either meets expectations or exceeds expectations. Not one mark against me in 11 years. He set down his wine glass and said, "Patrick, this is constructive dismissal. For people who aren't familiar with Canadian employment law, here's the short version. If an employer makes fundamental changes to your position, reducing your pay, stripping your responsibilities, effectively demoting you, without your consent, that can be treated legally the same as being fired. You can resign and still pursue wrongful dismissal. And in Ontario, after 11 years of service, the entitlements can be significant. I won't go into the numbers. That's private. But I will say that when Derek laid it out for me, the conversation shifted from what do I do to what do I want. What I wanted was to leave with my dignity intact, to not spend the next 5 years of my life watching a 31-year-old dismantle what I'd built while I sat 2 desks away and offered advice. to not have to smile at my VP every morning and pretend that what she'd done was acceptable. I gave my notice on a Thursday morning. 2 weeks. Standard professional courtesy. I didn't make a speech. I didn't send a company-wide email. I didn't pull anyone aside to tell them what I thought of the situation. I walked into my VP's office, put my resignation letter on her desk. I'd had Derek look it over, and I told her I was moving on to new opportunities and that I wished the company well. She looked at the letter. Then she looked up at me. "Patrick," she said, "can we talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "I've made my decision. I want to tell you what happened next because it is the part of the story that I didn't anticipate, and it is the part that, honestly, still gives me some quiet satisfaction when I think about it late at night. Within a week of my notice going in, I received a call from the VP of Operations at ClearPath Freight, one of Meridian's main competitors, also based out of the GTA. We had met twice over the years at industry events. He had heard through the channels that exist in every industry, the quiet networks of people who talk to people, that I might be available. He asked if I'd be interested in a conversation. I said yes. But that's not the part that surprised me. The part that surprised me came from CP Rail. CP Rail is not a small account. It's one of the most significant freight relationships Meridian held, worth somewhere north of $4 million annually to the company's revenue. I had personally managed that relationship for 6 years. I knew their operations people by name. I knew their seasonal patterns, their pain points, their preferred communication style, their history with every carrier we'd ever connected them with. When my CP Rail contact, a logistics manager I'd worked with for years, a man named Elliot, one of the most straightforward people I've met in this business, found out I was leaving. He called me directly on my cell phone. "I just heard," he said. "Is it true?" I confirmed it. There was a pause. Then he said, "I want you to know that our preference has always been to work through people we trust, and we trust you." He wasn't making a promise. He was being careful, as you have to be in these situations, because there are procurement processes and board approvals and 100 other things that govern how a crown corporation manages its vendor relationships. But the subtext was clear to anyone who spent 20 years in this industry. I thanked him. I kept my voice even. 3 weeks after I left Meridian, I signed a consulting agreement with ClearPath. 6 weeks after that, ClearPath was brought in to support CP Rail's Western Ontario freight coordination on an interim basis while CP Rail assessed its vendor relationships. I was the lead on the account. I'm not going to pretend that I engineered any of this. I didn't. I made one phone call, answered one other phone call, and let 11 years of relationship capital do what it was going to do anyway. That's not revenge. That's gravity. What I heard later, and I heard it from 2 separate people still inside Meridian, neither of whom I'll name, was that the CP Rail transition triggered a review at the board level. That there were conversations about how the relationship had been managed. That certain decisions made during the structural realignment period came under scrutiny. I don't know exactly what happened inside those rooms. I wasn't there. What I know is that Trent was no longer with the company by the end of summer. I don't take satisfaction in that the way I once thought I might. Honestly, when you're in the middle of being pushed out, you imagine the day when the people who pushed you will face consequences, and you think it'll feel like something triumph, maybe, or vindication. What it actually feels like is quiet. Like the last few seconds after a storm when everything goes still and you realize you can hear the birds again. I'm writing this from my home office in Oakville. It's a Tuesday morning. Zoe called last night from Halifax. She's settling in well at Dell. She has a roommate she likes. She's already joined a student research group studying microplastic contamination in the Bedford Basin. Lena's downstairs making breakfast. Through the window, I can see the backyard, the maple tree we planted when we first moved in, when Zoe was 9. The leaves are starting to turn that particular October orange that I always forget about until it happens. The consulting work is going well. More than well, actually. I have 3 clients now, all in freight and logistics, and I'm earning more than I was at Meridian. I set my own hours. I have a standing Thursday morning call with Elliot at CP Rail that I genuinely look forward to. I take Fridays off. Last month, Lynn and I drove up to Tobermory for a long weekend. We hiked the Bruce Trail, ate fish and chips at a place on the harbor, slept 9 hours a night. On the Sunday morning, I sat on the dock outside our rented cottage with a coffee that I actually drank while it was still hot. I thought about that flickering light above my desk, the 2 maintenance requests that nobody answered. I thought, I'm glad I stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. Derek called it constructive dismissal. The legal system would have called it a settlement. But what it really was, what any of this really was, is simpler than that. I was worth more than they were willing to pay. So I left. And the work followed me. That's not a story about revenge. That's a story about what happens when you finally believe what your wife has been telling you all along.